I was late to my own origin story. That's the part nobody ever mentions when they talk about what happened in the basement of the Chronos Tower. They talk about the unit. They talk about Balkus. They talk about the chest cannons going off and the whole East Wing losing 3 floors. They don't mention that I was 20 years old, that my scooter had a cracked carburetor I couldn't afford to fix, that I was failing 2 classes, and that the most dangerous thing I had ever done before that Tuesday in October was eat leftover Kung Pao chicken 4 days past its date. They want the mythology. They don't want the kid who stuffed an alien artifact in his backpack because it was shiny, and he was curious, and he didn't have anywhere better to be. I'm telling it the way it happened. You decide what it means. My name is Sean Barker. I was a student at Pacific Western on a partial scholarship that covered tuition but not books, rent, or the increasingly creative explanations I had to give my father about why I needed another $50. I trained at a dojo on Figueroa 3 evenings a week because Mizki's father had paid my first 3 months of dues, and I was too proud to quit and too broke to continue, so I stayed and got better than I had any right to be. The instructor was a 60-year-old man named Taki, who had the hands of someone who had been doing this for 40 years, and the disposition of someone who expected you to be doing it badly for at least the first 3. He was not wrong about me. I was doing it badly. But I was showing up, which is the part he said mattered. And most mornings I believed him. Mizuki was Tetsu Sagawa's daughter, and Tetsu Sagawa was the first man I ever watched die, though I didn't know at the time that's what I was watching. I didn't see the actual killing. I want to be clear about that. I saw the aftermath, the yellow crime scene tape, the forensics van, the particular stillness that a street acquires when something irreversible has happened there. The river basin near the old rail yards, dry that time of year, chalked with tire tracks and scattered refuse. The kind of place you don't go after dark, unless you have business there or you're stupid. And Tetsu Sagawa had business there and I was stupid. What I saw was the hollow in the trash pile, where something had been hidden, and the lunchbox sitting crooked against the retaining wall, like it had been placed there by someone running out of time. I picked it up because that's what 20-year-olds do. You see a thing, you pick it up. You don't ask why it's humming. It was a dull metallic gray, roughly octagonal, about the size of 2 fists together. It felt warm through the plastic of the lunchbox, the specific warmth of something generating heat from within rather than absorbing it from outside. It had no seam I could find, no buttons, no obvious opening mechanism. It vibrated at a frequency just below the threshold of hearing. You didn't hear it so much as feel it behind your back teeth, the way you feel a bass note at a concert, through your sternum and your jaw before your ears register it. I told myself it was some kind of electronics component. I told myself a lot of things during that walk home. The scooter had died 6 blocks away. I was pushing it with one hand and carrying the lunchbox in the other. And the city at 8 in the evening was doing what the city does. Traffic noise. Someone's music leaking from a 2nd-floor window, the smell of a taqueria, and then exhaust fumes, and then someone's garbage cans that hadn't been emptied. Los Angeles occupies itself. It doesn't notice you. That was still true, I remind myself, even that night. The city didn't notice. The city has never noticed. That's one of the things I've come to understand about what we were dealing with. An organization that had operated in this city for decades, that had its name on a skyscraper 4 miles from where I was walking, that had its chairman quoted in the business section of the LA Times, and the city just went about its business and didn't notice at all. By the time the gang came out of the alley, I had more or less forgotten the thing was in my backpack. The gang was 4 of them, mid-20s, the patient and bored expression of men who do this regularly and find it unremarkable. One of them said something I didn't catch. Another one stepped in front of the scooter and I stopped, because stopping is the correct response to having someone step in front of your scooter. And the third one hit me from behind before I'd finished processing that I should turn around. I went down on one knee and the backpack swung forward on the strap, and the lunchbox tumbled out onto the asphalt and cracked open along a seam I hadn't found. And the unit rolled free. Just rolled, a gray octagon rolling on black asphalt, catching the streetlight in a way that made it look almost liquid. And I reached for it without thinking, because it was the only thing I cared about in that moment. My safety, not the men, the object. My fingers closed around it, and my forehead came down hard against its surface. And something inside it decided that was close enough. I don't have the words for what happened next. I've tried for years. I've sat with it, and turned it over, and tried to find the language, and the language isn't there. The closest I've come is this. Imagine that everything you are has been written in sand, and a wave comes in, and for one moment there is no writing and no sand and no beach. Just the wave. Just the pure motion of it. Everything in process, nothing in place, and then the wave recedes, and everything is written again but differently. Cut into stone this time. Permanent in a way sand never was. That's the closest I can get. Everything I had been, rewritten in something that didn't wash away. The armor formed around me from the contact points outward. I felt it at my neck first, 2 points of heat, precisely placed, like a pair of hands being laid on my shoulders with deliberate gentleness. And then it spread. Not like putting on clothing. More like the clothing putting on you. Like something large and old deciding to trust you with its body. The weight of it settled into me, and it was not uncomfortable. That was the thing that frightened me most in those first seconds. Not the transformation. Not the forming over my skin. The fact that it felt like coming home. Like stepping into a space that had been waiting for you to fill it for a very long time. The gang ran. All 4 of them, fast. I stood in the alley and looked at my hands. Armored, plated, jointed at the knuckles with a precision that no human craftsman could have managed, carrying a blue-gray sheen that caught the streetlight and scattered it like a prism. And I felt the city around me in a way I had never felt anything before. Every vibration in the pavement, the heartbeats of the men running away, the distant bass thrum of traffic on the freeway. The unit wasn't just on me, it was reading the world through me. I was the sensor array, and it was the processing engine, and together we were something neither of us had been separately. I would have stood there all night. It dissolved 12 minutes later. That's the other part nobody discusses. The first activation, the unit testing whether you're a viable host, whether your nervous system can carry the load without burning out, whether the bond is a bond or just contact, lasts as long as it lasts, and then it retreats. I felt it go the same way I had felt it arrive. From the extremities inward, the weightlifting, the enhanced awareness narrowing back to ordinary human perception, and then 2 small points of heat at the base of my skull that went cold. And I was standing in an alley in my regular clothes with 2 small scars on the back of my neck and a lunchbox cracked open on the asphalt. I walked the rest of the way home pushing the scooter. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my apartment, which was a studio in Koreatown, that cost more than it should have, and smelled of the previous tenants cooking in a way that I had stopped noticing 6 months ago. And I stared at the stride to decide on whether what I had experienced was real. By morning I had decided it was real. That decision made the following days considerably more difficult. The man who came to the dojo and spoke to Mizuki was named Max Reed. He was a CIA field agent. Mid-40s, the kind of man who looks like he has been carrying information that makes him tired, and is waiting for an opportunity to set some of it down. He told Miska about her father Frella, specific language that official people use for terrible news. The language designed to convey facts, while minimizing the surface area that grief can attach to. Miski received it the way she received everything. With a composure that was not coldness. She had her father's precision, Miski. She processed things fully before she allowed herself to feel them, and she was still processing when Reed asked her to come with him to the crime scene to identify any items that might have belonged to her father. I followed them. I was supposed to be in class. I was not in class. I parked the scooter 2 blocks away and walked to the river basin and stood at the perimeter of the tape and watched the forensics team work the area. And that was when I saw the lunchbox, or rather, the absence of the lunchbox, the hollow in the trash pile that told me exactly what I had already done. Reed didn't see me. Miski didn't see me. I walked back to the scooter with the particular combination of dread and clarity that comes when you understand that you have already made a choice that cannot be unmade, and that everything going forward is a consequence of it. The men who came for Miski the next morning were not men. I mean that precisely. That is the thing about the Zoanoids that takes the longest to understand, and the longest to accept, and the longest to forgive yourself for not having recognized earlier. They are not a separate species. They were human, every one of them, or had been human before the Chronos Corporation got to them. The Chronos Corporation had been operating on this planet since before this country existed, since before most countries that currently exist. They had arrived here 3 centuries ago with a plan that required no urgency, a plan that operated on a timescale that no human institution could match, because human institutions are rebuilt every generation, and the Chronos Corporation was not human. They had found the people who wanted power badly enough to submit to the process. The process was not described to them in detail before they consented. Process involved things that no ethical review board would have approved, if any ethical review board had known to review it. The man named Lisker had once been human in the way that something might once have been a tree before someone made it into a chair. Shape was still there in certain lights. The grain, the original structure, everything that the tree had grown itself into was gone. I watched Lisker's people take Misky from the street outside her apartment. I had gone to check on her. That was the extent of my plan, to check on her, to make sure she was all right, to tell her what I had found at the river basin. I watched from half a block away, and I was not close enough, and not fast enough, and not anything enough, and she was in the van before I had finished processing what was happening. Reed found me 2 hours later. He had been watching the apartment. We found each other at the coffee shop on the corner, and sat down, and he showed me his credentials, and I didn't care about his credentials. He could see from my face that I had been at the scene. He asked how long I had been there, and I told him, and he made a sound that was not quite a sigh. Did they see you? The one in charge looked at me. Lisker. Reed turned his coffee cup in his hands. He's been with Chronos for 15 years. Former special operations before the conversion. Before. He paused on that word in a way that told me he had been pausing on it for a long time. He'll know you were there. He'll have your face. Tell me about the unit. He looked at me. The thing from the lunchbox. The thing I found at the river basin. I have it. I want to know what it is. Reed set down his coffee. He was quiet for a long moment. The quiet of a man deciding how much to say, and then deciding to say all of it. Because the time for careful disclosure was behind us. He had been investigating Chronos for 6 years. He had come to it the way investigators come to things that feel wrong before they can prove they're wrong. Through the accumulation of anomalies. Through the cases that didn't add up. Through the missing persons reports that clustered around certain addresses, certain employers, certain industrial facilities that had no clear reason to exist in the locations they occupied. He had built a file. He had presented the file to 3 different supervisors in 2 different agencies. He had been told twice that his conclusions were speculative. He had been told once to close the file and move on to other matters. He had not closed the file. He told me about Chronos. He told me what the corporation actually was. Not a corporation, not a research institution, not any of the things its filings and its press releases and its annual reports described it as. An organization that had been on this planet for 3 centuries, that had arrived here with a plan for this world, that would take time to execute, that had embedded itself in human infrastructure, with the patience of something that does not die on a human timescale. He told me what the people inside it had done to themselves. The conversion process, the willing and the less than willing, the decades of genetic engineering applied to human subjects, with a consistency that no ethical oversight had ever had access to, because no ethical oversight had ever known to look. He told me the unit was not a human invention, had never been, had been brought to Earth 3 centuries ago, part of the operational infrastructure, and had been stolen by Tetsu Sagawa, when Sagawa decided that what Chronos was building toward needed to be interrupted. Why did he steal that particular thing? Reed wrapped both hands around his cup. Because it was the keystone. Everything they've built, the conversion program, the network, the zoanoid hierarchy. It all depends on the Zoalord having uncontested authority. The unit is the only thing in existence that can challenge that authority. Sagawa knew that. He'd been with Chronos long enough to understand the architecture. He paused. He also knew he wasn't going to be able to use it. He was converted years ago. A zoanoid himself, In the early stages before the full transformation was complete, his biology was wrong for the unit too. What he wanted was to keep it out of Chronos' hands until he could find a way to destroy it. He didn't think it should exist. He didn't think anyone should have access to that much influence over that many people. Reed looked at me steadily. He spent 20 years inside that organization, and he watched what authority over a network of 4,000 converted humans did to a person, and he decided nobody should have it, including himself. I thought about Tetsu Sagawa, who I had never met, who had given his daughter karate lessons at a dojo on Figueroa, who had died in a river basin with a toaster in his briefcase and an alien artifact in a lunchbox in the trash because he was trying to protect something he thought was too dangerous to exist. The full capability, not just the armor. The armor is the least of it. Reed leaned forward. The unit is a command interface. The Zoalord, Balkus, controls the zoanoid network through a carrier wave. Every converted human on the planet is tuned to that frequency. Whoever holds the unit and bonds with it can access the same carrier wave, override Balkus's control, send the whole system in a different direction, or shut it down entirely. I was quiet for a moment. Outside the coffee shop, the city continued to occupy itself, indifferent, and their scientists couldn't activate it. 50 years of trying. The unit requires a specific kind of neural interface that their xenobiology said was impossible for any species in their database. He paused. They had humans at the bottom of the list. Because we're too fragile, too short-lived, too prone to panic. That's what their documentation said. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, and then a 20-year-old fell on it in an alley. We went over the plan 3 times, which was 2 times more than we had the actual intelligence to support. Reed knew the approximate location of the warehouse from surveillance he had conducted before Miski's abduction. He knew the number of zoanoids, roughly, not precisely, based on the teams he had seen operating in the field. He did not know the internal layout. He did not know the exact nature of the restraints they would have on Miski. He did not know whether the unit would activate on demand, or whether it required a trigger, the way the first activation had. Told him what I knew, which was limited to the physical experience and the duration and the 2 scars at the base of my neck that I had looked at in the mirror that morning and identified as the interface nodes. Can you activate it deliberately? He asked. I don't know. I'll find out when I have to. He seemed to find this an unsatisfying answer. I found it an unsatisfying answer too. Reed had been a field operative for 22 years. He understood operational uncertainty the way you understand a recurring injury. Not as an abstraction, but as a physical reality you have learned to account for in how you move. He did not tell me the plan was good. He told me it was the plan we had, and that the distinction mattered. It is a particular discipline to proceeding with inadequate information. Not pretending the inadequacy doesn't exist, not being paralyzed by it, but moving forward with a clear accounting of what you don't know, and what the consequences of each unknown might be. Reed had that discipline. I was learning it that week in the most compressed possible curriculum. We also talked about what we were not going to do. Fear. We were not going to call the police, not because the police were corrupt, but because the police did not have a framework for what they would encounter inside that warehouse. And officers who encounter something, they have no framework for make decisions that get people killed in ways that are nobody's fault and everyone's problem. We were not going to wait for additional resources, because Miski was in there now, and waiting had a cost that was not abstract. We were not going to make a plan that depended on the unit behaving in a way I had not yet demonstrated it could behave. What we were going to do was go in. That was the plan. We were going to go in, Reed through the loading dock, and me through whatever entry point presented itself. And we were going to trust that the unit would do what it had done in the alley when I needed it to. One thing, Reed said, before we got out of the car. If you get separated from me in there, if something happens to me, you get Miski out. That's the mission, not Balkus. The files, not solving the larger problem. Miski. Understood, I'm serious, Sean, I heard you the first time. He looked at me for a moment. Yeah, he said. You did. He got out of the car, we went anyway. The warehouse was on the east side of the port, a long, low building that smelled of salt water and machine oil, and the specific industrial absence of light that buildings acquire when they have been used for purposes their architects didn't design them for. The loading dock in back was less secure than the front entrance. Security resources spread thin, the assumption being that a threat would come from the obvious direction. Reed went in through the loading dock, which was the professional approach. I went in through a window on the north side that I broke with my elbow because I was trying to be quiet, and it turns out I am not constitutionally a quiet person. The glass made considerably more noise than I had planned for. The unit woke before I'd finished climbing through the frame. I felt it at the nodes, that heat, those 2 pressure points, the beginning of the familiar wave. And I helped it along this time, deliberately, leaning into the process instead of being surprised by it. The activation took 6 seconds. I know that because I counted. I was standing in a dark hallway in a warehouse by the port of Los Angeles, counting seconds, watching alien bio-armor form around my body, and I was frightened and I was counting because counting was something I could control. First Zoanoid found me before I'd gone 30 feet. He had already changed. Whatever the process was, the specific cellular cascade that converted a human nervous system and musculature into something else. It was complete in him, and what came around the corner, at the end of the hallway, was large and fast, and had been optimized for exactly this, finding things in enclosed spaces, and eliminating them. He was the size of a large man, made 2/3 again as large, with the kind of mass that should have made him slow but didn't, because the Chronos engineers had addressed that problem when they had addressed everything else. I stepped inside his first swing. This is what Taki had spent 2 years trying to teach me. Not the dramatic techniques, not the throws, the step, precise and committed movement that puts you inside an opponent's reach instead of outside, in the space their bodies has vacated in the act of attacking, where the attack can't follow you. It is counterintuitive in the way that most useful things are counterintuitive. Every instinct says get away from the large, fast thing, and the technique says go toward it, into the hollow it creates, and redirect. Taki had given me 2 years of this instruction, and I had been an indifferent student, and now I was in a hallway with a zoanoid, and it was the only thing I had. I stepped in and redirected him into the shelving unit, and the shelving unit lost the argument conclusively. Treek. The unit was processing them as I moved through the building. I felt it the same way I had felt the city on the first fract. Activation, as sensation rather than language, pressure and temperature, and the specific vibrational signature of biological systems under stress. It was telling me things about the zoanoids that I didn't have the training to fully interpret, but enough. That one favored its left, that the one coming from the up walkway had a joint compromise in its right knee from a previous injury that hadn't fully knitted, that the pair at the far end of the warehouse were linked. Communicating, coordinating, a tactical partnership I needed to address simultaneously rather than sequentially. I got through them. I will not catalog the details. There were 7 zoanoids between the entrance and the back of the warehouse, and I got through all 7, and the cost was a bruised rib on my left side that I didn't feel through the armor until later, and a cut on my forearm from a transformed hand that had claws where fingers used to be. The armor had closed over the cut almost immediately. I noted this and filed it. Lisker was waiting. He was not in his changed form yet. He stood at the back of the warehouse in the posture of someone who has been standing there for a while, arms loose at his sides, and he looked at me in the armor the way a diagnostician looks at a patient, professionally, without surprise, cataloging what he saw against what he expected to see. He was in his human form not remarkable to look at. Medium height, lean, the specific kind of lean that comes from low body fat and high training volume. His face was the face of a man who had made decisions and lived with them, and had stopped having opinions about whether the decisions were right. Barker, he said. Sean Barker, 20 years old, Pacific Western University. Girlfriend is Miski Sagawa, who is in the room behind me. He tilted his head slightly. You're not supposed to be able to activate the unit. Chronos biology has a word for what you are. It translates roughly as anomaly. Where is she? He looked at me for another moment. Then he changed. In the bad light of the warehouse, with everything moving fast, I had gotten an impression of his changed form. Here, in slightly better light, with him moving at something closer to deliberate speed, I could see what Chronos had made of him with more clarity. They had taken someone who was already a weapon, and they had improved the tolerances, reinforced the structure, added capabilities that evolution had not gotten around to. He was wrong the way a thing modified past its design parameters is wrong, functional, optimized, wrong, in a way that you feel before you can articulate it. He knew about the control metal. He had identified it during our first encounter, in the alley, and he had filed it. That was how he operated. Everything filed, everything usable. The patience of a man who had decided that the correct approach to any problem was to identify the leverage point and wait for the right moment to apply force to it. That the control metal was the sphere at my forehead, the interface node between the unit's operational system and my own nervous system. Hit it hard enough and the armor stuttered. Hit it harder and the bond broke. He led with it. Came in fast and precisely angled. The first exchange a testing move. Contact with the control metal. Just enough to register whether it would work the way it had in the alley. The armor stuttered. I felt it. The bond going thin. The awareness narrowing. 2 seconds of the ordinary world bleeding back in through the armor's edges. He saw it. He filed it. We worked through the warehouse in a pattern that was less a fight than an extended negotiation, each exchange buying information for the next. I was faster than he expected. The unit was faster than either of us. Processing the information from each exchange and adjusting my positioning in ways that I was not consciously directing. The way your body adjusts your balance without your directing it. But Lisker was also adjusting. The intelligence behind his eyes was working. He was patient, in a way that most things you are trying to hit are not patient. Weber came in from the left on the 7th exchange. I didn't see her until the unit registered her approach as a spike in threat assessment from that direction, and the information arrived in my body as the overwhelming sense that something on my left arm was very wrong. But by then Lisker had already positioned his strike. The control metal took the impact full on. The bond didn't stretch this time, it broke. The armor dissolved into a liquid that had no business being liquid. Silver and slow, running down my body and pooling on the concrete floor, taking me with it, and there was a moment where I was aware of being dissolved, and then I wasn't aware of anything. Miski told me later when I asked that she had screamed, that she had been in the back room, restrained to a chair with her wrists behind her, and she had heard the fighting, and she had hoped, and then she had heard it stop, and the silence after it stopped was worse. She said she sat in that silence for several minutes before Lisker's people came to move her. What happened in the interval between my dissolution and my reconstruction is not something I experienced. I know it from documentation, from Reed's account, from the security footage that survived, and from the forensic analysis that 3 separate research institutions conducted on the organic residue in East's laboratory over the following year. I can report it. I cannot claim to have lived through it. The unit held the bond at the molecular level. The quantum coherent pattern of my nervous system, the architecture that had made the bond possible in the first place, was preserved in the liquid medium of the dissolved armor, while the unit rebuilt the physical substrate around it. The engineers who designed the unit had included this capability for the same reason they had included everything else. Because the host could not be irreplaceable if the host could be killed. The unit was designed for a very long war, conducted over a very long time, and permanent hosts were the point. What they had not designed for was how long the rebuilding would take, when the host in question was human. Their testing matrix had not included human subjects. Their models for reconstruction time were based on the 17 species they had tested, none of which had bonded. The xenobiology team's best estimate, based on the documentation they had written for their own operational planning, was that reconstruction from dissolution would take approximately 40 minutes. Took 11 hours. The unit was repairing me at the cellular level, which required time, and it was also deepening the integration, completing the interface work that the earlier activations had only begun, making permanent the connections that had been provisional, writing into my biology the architecture that would make every future activation faster and more complete than the ones before it. It was building something more durable than what it had found. Doctor. East had been the Chronos Corporation xenobiologist for 15 years. He was, by the documentation's own account, exceptional at his work. Rigorous, thorough, capable of maintaining focus through extended experimental cycles that would have worn down less disciplined minds. He had documented the conversion of 214 human beings. He had watched the process with the effortless attention of someone who has decided that what he is doing is science rather than harm, and that science is its own justification, and that the justification does not require constant re-examination once it has been established to the practitioner's satisfaction. He had not established it to my satisfaction. When I came back, I came through him. I am not going to describe it further. I am telling you it was fast. I am telling you, I do not carry guilt about it in the way I once thought I would. East made choices for 15 years, and the last consequence of those choices was not something he had planned for, but it followed from them with a logic I have examined carefully and found sound. I stood in East's laboratory in the armor, whole, and I was changed. The anger was the surface of it. Underneath the anger was something I had more trouble naming. The unit had spent hours rebuilding me, and the rebuilding had continued the integration. The interface going deeper, finding more purchase in my nervous system, making permanent connections that the first activation had only sketched. Feel the building around me in the way I had felt the city. Distributed, detailed, alive with the electromagnetic hum of the Zoanoid network. 87 points of presence. 87 converted humans carrying Balkus's carrier wave in their rewritten nervous systems like a radio tower, carries a signal, continuously, without rest, without the ability to shut it off. And underneath all of that, the deep Zoalord signal. Balkus, not his thoughts, not his memories. The specific electromagnetic authority that a Zoalord projects through the network. The carrier wave of absolute command. The frequency that every zoanoid in his organization had been tuned to receive as if it were law. I felt it the way you feel subsonic bass. Not as sound, but as pressure, as something the body registers before the mind does. I also felt the unit deciding what to do about it. I found Reed 2 corridors away. The experimental chamber lock was designed for containment, not for a bio-armored individual with reasons to be motivated. I pulled the door off its frame and set it against the wall with more care than the situation probably warranted. I was trying to preserve the building at that point, which in retrospect was optimistic. Reed was strapped to a chair with 4 IV lines in his arm and his eyes open, which told me they hadn't sedated him, which told me they had wanted him conscious for whatever they were doing. You were dead, he said. His voice was level, which I respected. Briefly. He started pulling the IV lines out himself, reaching across his body one-handed because only one arm was free. I know. Don't ask me to explain it. He looked at me for a moment. He made the decision, which I could see him make, not to ask further questions about that. Miski is 2 floors up. Balkus has her in the main conference room. He's been having her questioned about the activation protocol. She doesn't know the activation protocol. No, but he doesn't know that yet, and she's buying time. Reed got the last IV line free and stood. He moved slowly, finding his balance after however long he'd been in the chair. Lisker is between us and the stairs. Ramsey too, I think. Lisker is not a problem anymore. Reed looked at me. He's alive, I said. He's not functional. We took the stairs. The Zoanoids we encountered had clearly been in the building for most of the night, running the search pattern they had established after my dissolution. And they were fatigued in the way that biological systems get fatigued regardless of modification. The Chronos engineers had improved many things, but they had not eliminated the need for recovery. I moved through them with efficiency and without pleasure. I was not enjoying any of this. The armor carried steadiness. The emptiness was real. The dread underneath it was also real. I kept the armor between my dread and my actions, and I moved forward, because Miski was 2 floors up, and because the alternative was to stop, and I had already determined that stopping was not an option I was willing to exercise. Miski's was in the conference room. She was restrained with her hands, secured to the chair's armrests, and her expression was the one I knew from 3 years together. The expression that means, I am frightened and I am not going to show it, and if you comment on it, I will not thank you. She looked at me in the armor, and her expression shifted through several stages very quickly. Sean. Yeah, you look different. It's the armor. Are you hurt? They just kept asking me questions I couldn't answer. She looked at my hands, armored, jointed. Are you okay? I thought about what accurate would look like as an answer. Ask me in 20 minutes. I got her out of the restraints, and we were in the stairwell heading down, Reed ahead and Mizuki between us, when Balkis found us. He had come from the upper floors. A private elevator I hadn't accounted for in my assessment of the building. He was in his human form. A well-dressed man in his 50s, gray at the temples. The expensive quiet of a man who has been the most dangerous thing in every room he has occupied for 3 centuries, and has long since stopped needing to demonstrate it. He wore a suit. I remember thinking about the suit. Something about the fact that he was wearing a suit in the basement of a building where his people had been conducting genetic experiments on human beings. He looked at me with the Zoalord's awareness, and what moved in his expression when he saw the armor was not what I expected. Not anger. Not the calculation of a predator assessing a threat. Something more like an engineer looking at an instrument reading that contradicts the theory. Assessment. The specific quality of attention that intelligent things give to facts that require them to revise their model of the world. You're bonded, he said, completely. That should be impossible for a human nervous system. I headbutted it. He blinked. I beg your pardon. The first activation, I fell and my forehead hit the sphere. It wasn't deliberate. He was quiet for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, I felt the Zoalord signal change. Felt him reach into the carrier wave and begin to send a network-wide call. A full alert to every zoanoid remaining functional in the building. I had time. Not much. Give me the unit, he said. He did not make it sound like a demand. He made it sound like the most reasonable thing anyone had ever suggested. You're not equipped to use it. You have no training, no context, no understanding of what it actually does, or what the consequences of activating its full capabilities are. You're a child who found a loaded weapon. I am not insulting you. That is a fact. I know what it does. You know what it does to you. You don't know what it does to the network. He looked at me with something that was almost patience. Every zoanoid on this planet is part of the unit's operating system. They are nodes. Their converted nervous systems carry the carrier wave, because that is what the conversion was designed to produce. If you activate the command function of the unit, the override capability, you don't destroy my authority. Collapse the network. Every node fails simultaneously. Every converted human on the planet dies, instantly, versibly. Silence in the stairwell. How many? Reed said from behind me. His voice was flat. The voice of a man who has been investigating this for years, and is hearing something he did not have. Globally, approximately 4,000. Balkis's tone had not changed. All of them human formerly. All of them carrying the carrier wave. All of them dying at the moment the network fails. He looked at me. I am not telling you this to protect myself. I stopped caring about my own continuity at some point in the last century. I am telling you because you are about to make a decision that you cannot unmake, and you should make it with accurate information. The Zoanoids arrived. Above and below, the stairwell doors opening, 6 of them taking positions, locking into Balkis's signal. I felt it in my chest. Felt the pull of the carrier wave directing them. The authority of the Zoalord moving through the network like current through wire. And I felt the unit show me something I had not understood. It was not a weapon. Balkis was right about that part. It was an interface. The word that kept coming back, two-way, designed for communication rather than command. The Zoalord system was a hierarchy of control, and the unit had been designed as an alternative to that hierarchy. Not to collapse it, not to replace it with a different authority. To offer every node in the network a choice about whether to remain a node. I didn't fully understand this. I understood enough. I opened the communication channel, not the command function, channel beneath it. The part of the unit that the engineers who built it had included for the moment when the Zoalord's authority was confronted by something that could offer the converted humans an alternative. I felt it go out through the carrier wave, carried on the same frequency as Balkis's authority, but not carrying his authority, carrying something else. The recognition of another presence, the acknowledgement that the presences receiving it were presences, not nodes, not components, not instruments, and that they were being given a moment to exist as something other than what they had been made into. The 6 zoanoids in the stairwell stopped moving. Balkus went very still. That's not the command function. No, you're not commanding them. No, he was quiet for a moment. Asking them, yes. The zoanoids did not revert. The conversion was permanent. I had not offered them a way out of what they were. What I had offered them was the experience, possibly for the first time in their converted existence, of being contacted rather than commanded, of having their awarenesses acknowledged as awareness rather than as a signal state. It was a small thing. It was the only thing I had. Most of them stood down, 2 did not. Those 2 I addressed as I had addressed the others. Efficiently, without anger, because anger would not have served anything at that point, and I was running on a very limited reserve of everything. Balkus watched. The Zoalord signal in my chest moved through rapid fluctuations that I had not expected from him. Variations that felt like something in the range of grief, and that surprised me. He had built the system. He had converted those people, or overseen the conversions, for 3 centuries, and when they stood down, he grieved. I kept that. I've thought about it often since. You can't maintain it, he said. The communication channel. It requires continuous carrier wave contact, continuous intent. When you sleep, when you lose focus, when you're injured, it drops. They revert to the network, to whatever controls the Zoalord position after me. I know. Then what is the point? You've bought a few minutes, perhaps a few hours, then it closes. The point is that they know, they've experienced it. You can take the channel back. You can restore your authority. But they know, now that the channel exists, that something other than command is possible on that frequency. Can't take that back. I looked at him. People do things with that kind of knowledge. You've had 3 centuries. You know what people do with knowledge. He changed. I will not try to describe the Zoalord form in detail because I was moving when it happened, and what I saw was the motion of it rather than the shape of it. And the motion was what mattered. He was large. He was faster than his size should have allowed. He had been optimized over 3 centuries of biological engineering to survive the consequences of being in his position. And the consequences of being in his position were people like me. He hit me twice. First strike found the control metal, and the bond went thin. Not broken, not quite, but thin enough that I felt myself on the boundary of dissolution. The ordinary world bleeding in through the armor's edges. I held on. I held the bond through a refusal that was not technique and was not training, and was just the flat refusal of someone who had died once already this week, and had found the experience non-negotiable. The bond held. The second strike took me off my feet and into the wall, and the wall lost part of itself, and I was on the floor with rubble on my chest, and something in my left shoulder ulcer, announcing damage in the specific loud and persistent way that injuries announce themselves when you've been ignoring them. I got back up. Reed had gotten Miski through the lower door. They were clear. That was the variable I had been protecting. Balkus stood between me and any exit. 3 times my mass. 3 centuries of engineered resilience and operational experience. 20 years old, with a cracked carburetor on my scooter, and 2 failed courses, and a shoulder that was reporting damage I was still not acknowledging, and I had already determined that none of that was going to stop me. The unit had been running assessments since the moment I came back from dissolution. Every fight in the building had been data. Every exchange in the stairwell had been data. The unit was not afraid. The unit did not operate in the register of fear. It had bonded with a human nervous system for the first time in its operational history, and it had been refining its understanding of what that meant, what the interface could carry, what new configurations became possible when the processing substrate was the most adaptive biological computing architecture that had evolved on this planet. The chest cannons had never been activated in the unit's operational history. This was in the technical documentation, a footnote in a 300-year-old report, flagged as a theoretical capability that no host activation had ever managed to produce. The hardware was present. The channels were intact. What had not existed before was a host whose nervous system could generate the coherent bioelectric field necessary to charge them. Human neurons can do quite a lot, when they are integrated with compatible hardware, and motivated by the specific combination of fear, grief, stubbornness, and absolute refusal that characterizes a young man who has died once this week and buried the cost of it and kept moving anyway. I felt the charge build. It was not comfortable. It felt like every nerve in my chest being asked to fire simultaneously, because that was approximately what was happening, and the sensation was somewhere between the worst muscle cramp I had ever experienced and the feeling of a current running through wet concrete. The unit held the build, found the resonance frequency, calibrated against Balkus's biology in the same way it had calibrated against the Zoanoids, reading him, finding the specific vulnerability, waiting for the moment of maximum exposure. He came for the control metal again. He had learned that it worked. He came in with precision and commitment, and I stood my ground, which was either courage or stubbornness or the specific kind of fatigue that makes you stop calculating whether moving backward is an option. And when he was 2 steps away, I let the unit fire. The discharge occupied all available acoustic space for a long moment, and then the moment was over. The stairwell above me had a different geometry than it had had before. Daylight was coming through new apertures in the walls. The east wing of the building had made decisions about its structural integrity that it had not previously made. Balkus was in the rubble, alive. The 3 centuries of engineering doing what they had been designed to do, maintaining continuity through damage that should have ended anything. Functional, not dangerous. Breathing, looking at the changed ceiling, the Zoalord signal in my chest reduced to a whisper. I stood over him in the armor. The charge was spent. My chest felt like I had run the full length of the city in August. The shoulder was making its position known in terms I could no longer elect to defer. The 4,000, I said. The converted, the registry. He breathed. You're going to give me the files, all of them. Every converted human on this planet, their locations, the contact protocols. I am going to find them. I am going to open the channel, one by one, and offer it. They can choose what they do with the knowledge. I looked at him. You'll do this because it's the right thing to do. I don't think you've lost track of that entirely. In 300 years. I think you know what right is. I think knowing what right is and not doing it is part of what those 300 years have been. He closed his eyes. He did not speak. He gave us the files 3 days later, from the medical facility in San Diego where the FBI was holding him pending the involvement of approximately 7 federal agencies and 3 international bodies that did not previously know they needed to have a policy on alien hybrid genetic conversion programs. He delivered the files through his attorney without conditions, without negotiation, without the kind of procedural obstruction that his legal representation had apparently been prepared to pursue. His attorney told Reed afterward that Balkus had seemed relieved. Reed told me, I thought about it for a long time. 300 years is a long time to carry something. I can say that, without knowing from experience, just from watching what it looked like to set it down. The files took 14 months to fully process. Reed coordinated the interagency response, a task that occupied him fully for the better part of 2 years, and aged him in ways that showed, though he would not say so directly. The 4,000 converted humans on the global registry were located over the course of that first year. In 41 countries, embedded in corporations and government agencies and research institutions and private households, living their converted lives with the particular combination of capability and isolation that the zoanoid condition imposed. Some of them had been converted willingly. More had not. I opened the channel for each of them individually. That was how it had to be done. The unit was specific about this in the way it communicated specificity, which was not language but which was unambiguous. The channel had to be offered individually. The choice had to belong to the individual. There was no broadcast version that preserved the integrity of the offering. It took 18 months. I spent 18 months traveling, sitting across from converted humans in hospital rooms and government facilities, and in one case, a fishing boat in the South Atlantic, opening the channel and being present, while each of them processed what it meant to have something other than Balkus's authority arrive on that frequency. The conversations were not uniform. Some of them were difficult. Some of them were quiet. Some of them involved things I had no training to respond to, and had to respond to anyway, because I was the one there. And training was not something the situation had waited for me to acquire. What the channel offered them was not freedom. They could not be unconverted. The biology was permanent. The Chronos engineers had been thorough about that. And the international research effort that had been organized in the wake of the tower incident was making progress, but not quickly. What the channel offered was the knowledge that they were known, that the frequency they carried in their rewritten nervous systems could transmit something other than the authority of an organization that had treated them as instruments, that another presence could arrive on that frequency and address them as people. Most of them chose to receive it. Several did not. I respected the ones who didn't. Choirs. Making an actuals that declining the choice be a genuine option. And I had worked hard enough to understand that to treat it as otherwise would have undercut everything the channel was supposed to mean. I still carry the unit. Psst, that is not a metaphor. The bond is permanent. The interface is continuous. The two small scars at the base of my neck are the only external evidence of something that has rewritten my biology at a level that 3 researchers institutions have now spent 2 years trying to characterize and have not finished characterizing. The unit is quiet most of the time. Present, attentive, the weight of Xiaoxing sitting just at the edge of awareness, like a hand resting lightly on your shoulder that you have learned to expect and have stopped trying to imagine the absence of. My eyes are different in certain lights, Reed says. I can't see it in the mirror. I believe him. The scooter I never fixed. I bought a truck the following spring, used, with money from the first of the government consulting contracts that Reed helped arrange. The kind of money that comes with the kind of work that cannot be listed on a conventional resume. The scholarship I finished, eventually, for reasons that felt different by the end than they had at the beginning. Less about proving something. More about not letting the person I had been before all of this disappear entirely, not because that person was remarkable, but because he was the person who had picked up a lunchbox out of curiosity and carried it home and held on when the bond stretched thin, and that seemed worth keeping track of. Misky stayed. That still surprises me on certain mornings. It asks of her to stay with someone carrying what I carry, to live beside the particular kind of vigilance that the unit requires, to have made a life with someone who is partly something that is not from here. She has never asked me to explain it. She has asked me twice whether I am still me, and both times I have said yes, and both times she has looked at me in the way she has of assessing things fully before she decides whether to accept them. Times she has nodded. I do not take that for granted. The channel is still open, distributed across 4,000 points of presence on this planet. Somewhere in the carrier wave, there is a frequency. Carries no commands. It asks for nothing. It is just the knowledge that another option exists. That the frequency the Zoalord system runs on can carry something other than authority. That the converted humans wired into the network are presences and not components. That the choice is there. You can't take knowledge back. Balkus knew that. He had known it for 3 centuries, about every other kind of power, about every other instrument of control, about every system he had built and administered, and watched outlast its original intentions. He found out it applies to this one too.